Guys, that is not what the Electoral College is.
Welcome back to DemocraZy.
This is a youth podcast brought to you by the League of Women Voters, Virginia's Youth Council. I'm your co-host, Charvi.
And I'm your co-host, Emma, and we're so excited to bring you back for our second episode after our first episode dropped about a month ago. Thank you so much to my friend Peter for making that amazing intro, as well as my friend Maddie for making our little logo.
And thank you, Nikki, our lovely editor, who does so much work behind the scenes, and Maisha, who has designed all of our Instagram posts.
And also thank you to Joan Port, the president of the Virginia League of Women Voters, for all your support.
Yeah. They make all of this possible.
So we, last episode, talked a lot about political efficacy and voter engagement, and our topic was a little bit more broad. But this episode, we are going to talk about the Electoral College, which is a lot more specific, and I think we're both excited to get into the history of it.
And this is all part of a plan to kind of help our viewers get a sense of how our government actually works. And of course, the Electoral College is going to be a really big pillar in that.
Yeah, and disclaimer, this episode has literally been filmed 5 times because both of us are not that great at technology, but we've pulled it together and we're figuring it out, and hopefully this will be an amazing take that will be the final.
All right. So, are you ready to talk about our civic case for today?
Yeah. With that, we're going to move to our civic case, which is, like we said, the Electoral College. Charvi, take it away.
So, I'm going to try and explain what the Electoral College is. Essentially, it's this body that casts the formal votes for president for each state. And the number of electoral votes that each state has is determined based on their number of House representatives and the number of senators that they have.
Yeah, and so the Electoral College is based on a first-past-the-post, winner-takes-all system, which basically means that in a given state, whichever candidate receives the most of that state's vote gets all of its electors. And like Charvi said, the electors are made up of the number of senators and representatives that state has.
There are 2 important exceptions to this winner-takes-all system, though.
Yeah, so Nebraska and Maine are actually different, and they do not have a winner-takes-all system. What they do is whichever candidate wins a given district gets that district's elector, and then whichever candidate wins the statewide vote gets the 2 electors that are the senators.
Exactly. It's a district vote instead of a state vote.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the reason that the Electoral College exists is really based in 2 key compromises. The first is kind of simple. It's just the founding fathers were trying to figure out, should they give more weight to the people who want a national popular vote or the ones who want Congress to elect their executive. And so there's this middle ground of having like the intermediary electors. The second compromise is not so pretty. It's the 3/5 compromise, which essentially said that enslaved people counted as 3/5 enslaved people counted as 3/5 of a person for the purpose of representation. And what this ended up doing ultimately was it gave advantage representationally to the South. They had more electors in their electoral college, and then also they had more representatives in Congress.
Yeah, and so there are a lot of criticisms because, like Charvi just said, its past is really controversial, and it has a very complex present as well. So one of the issues that people talk about a lot is the fact that it makes swing states disproportionately important in elections.
Exactly.
So essentially the way that works is because everyone is certain that Democrats will win California, Republicans will win Texas, etc., focus is tuned to swing states like Pennsylvania.
Yes.
And so there's this political invisibility for issues that happen in politically homogenous states because the focus is on the states whose electoral votes will actually make a difference in the long run.
Yeah, the goal is catering to places like Michigan and all, which were, again, swing states in the last election, for example.
Yeah, and on a similar note, the vote doesn't go far in states that are very Democratic or very Republican. So, for example, a Republican's vote in California, that vote will stay kind of in the California bucket because of the Democratic majority. And
essentially that vote will never leave California because it's unlikely that the Republican vote is going to change, the majority Democrat population. And so that's the important part here, is that not everyone's voice is making it to a national platform. Therefore, not all of our votes actually matter in terms of in that sense. for who becomes our president.
Exactly.
There's also a debate of whether big states or small states get more advantage in the Electoral College system. Small states like to say that, or small states argue that bigger states boss them around because California, again, as our example, has 55 electoral votes, or Florida has 29, whereas a state like Iowa has only 6. But then there's also, on the flip side, big states feel like small states have disproportionate representation because Wyoming, for example, will have 1 electoral vote per 200,000 people, whereas our favorite, California, has 1 electoral vote per 700,000 people. And so that's a very big disparity, obviously, in terms of how much platform each voice gets within those two separate states.
Yeah, and so when we talk about big versus small, it's not even a matter of geographical size, but it's more about population per capita and how many electors they have per person.
Yeah.
And so that's the reason why we have our guest, Mr. Sam Ulmschneider, coming in to talk about the Electoral College, because it's such a complex issue. And there are so many different things to talk about, including
just so many nuances.
There are so many barriers to change that change often seems impossible, especially to people who don't know how the system works.
Exactly.
So with that, we would love to bring Sam Ulmschneider, a teacher at Maggie Walker Governor's School, to come talk about the Electoral College and more of the nuances and modern applications of the issue.
Yes. We'll also talk about some of the reasons why it's hard to just outright abolish the system. And so with that, let's take it away.
Hey y'all, how are you?
We're doing great. It's been 2 days. Podcast recording has been rough, but we are trying and we're kind of succeeding. So
it's a new skill and a hard one. It podcast that it looks like people just sit down and chatter, right? But there's actually a lot that goes into the background and setting up the technical expertise and things like that. So I'm glad you're doing it.
Correct. Okay, so we're going to jump into our questions for you. Like we talked about earlier, we are talking about the Electoral College and kind of the benefits of it and the reasons against it and some of the obstacles to completely getting rid of it or the obstacles to some alternatives that might be out there. So Charvi, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, so I feel like this Electoral College debate kind of came back into focus after the 2016 election with Hillary Clinton, who obviously got the popular vote but did not win the Electoral College vote.
No, it didn't come back into focus, right? So the Electoral College has regularly been a feature of American political debate and discourse and discussion, right? The first time that people tried to get rid of the Electoral College was in the 1820s. When a number of amendments were introduced into the U.S. The U.S. Senate 3 times between 1818 and 1836 to get rid of the Electoral College, and they only just barely didn't make the 2/3 requirement in the U.S. House to move on to the states for ratification. Right, and then in the wake of the 1968 election, where the Electoral College almost imploded. Because there was this third-party candidate who almost got enough votes to cause it to go to the House. Then there was another set of amendments to eliminate the Electoral College that almost made it to the states for ratification, and by 2 votes in the U.S. Senate this time, it failed. And then after the year 2000, when George Bush lost the popular vote, but won the electoral vote, again, there was a movement to change the Electoral College that failed at the House and Senate level. And so for you, because you were born in, the godforsaken year of 2008, it seems like it just came back into focus in 2016 because of the Clinton election, but that's not the case at all.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a misconception where, like you said, I obviously wasn't alive for any of those other kind of debates about reasons for and against the Electoral College. And so when I think about someone winning the popular vote but not winning the presidency, I'm like, oh, Hillary Clinton. But obviously that's not the first situation where that happened.
I do wonder, though. I know in 1960 with the election between Kennedy and Nixon, their popular vote, the margin of difference was only about 100,000 or so. So I almost wonder, would that, if we did switch to a popular vote, would that cause more, I guess, disputes over the results of elections than if we kept the Electoral College?
Well, it depends. We've never seen what a popular vote campaign would look like, or a popular vote mobilization, right? So it's possible that you'd end up with what you're suggesting about 1960, right, where the vote is very close, and so what if we recounted, and we'd end up with this hot mess because it's unclear who actually won the national popular vote. But a national popular vote election might actually mobilize a whole lot more voters, right? And so it's entirely possible that you'd increase voter turnout so much that it's actually easier to see who the winner is. So that's like a double hypothetical double blind, right? We don't know what turnout would look like or what voter patterns would look like in a popular vote election. And so I think that the ghost of having a national popular vote would cause like endless recount scenarios is a fake problem, right? You can look at other countries that have national popular votes and their presidential elections don't collapse into recounts regularly, right? Mexico, France, they do this, and they don't regularly have their presidential elections implode into recounts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's just about the reason people are concerned about a national popular vote is just because like we haven't done it before, and America is such a like unique system in the way that our government's set up that it's really easy to think about every possible negative for every scenario, and no matter what you think of, there are always going to be so many negatives. And so it's really just about kind of balancing the positives and negatives to get a system that mostly works for everyone.
Yeah, no political system is perfect. I mean, there's a really important political scientist named Juan Linz, Linz, who basically said, yeah, presidential systems just are bad, right? Don't have presidential systems at all. Like, don't have national popular votes for the presidency. Don't have any presidencies. You should just have a prime minister instead. So, there are flaws to any structure, but I think probably the Electoral College has a lot more flaws than it does advantages, and like that's ultimately where you have to make your calculation.
Yeah.
Since we're
Uh,
talking about the flaws, I actually have heard about a land doesn't vote debate, but that's one of the things that Emma and I both didn't fully have a grasp on.
Yeah. So the Electoral College gives votes to states based on the number of representatives they have plus the number of senators they have, which means that smaller states have a little bit of a boost because those are the states that would not have as many votes if they didn't get that bonus from their two senators. And the
mhm.
states that benefit the most from this are actually pretty tiny in number. It's like Rhode Island and Wyoming and Idaho, and just a relatively small number of states that actually have their representation ratio in the Electoral College substantially increased by this. The reason that people have this really immature, silly internet debate with like, "Oh, land doesn't vote," um, is because it's maps, man. When you look at an Electoral College map of the United States, it looks like the Electoral College advantages states that are geographically large. Because when you color in the Dakotas red, it looks like the land is what's voting
Yeah.
and not the people.
Mhm.
But that particular debate is just based on a misperception that people have when they look at maps. Like, there are plenty of ways in which the Electoral College is problematic, but the idea that it rewards land is just wrong. Like, a state that is geographically very tiny, like Rhode Island, but also has a very small population, like Rhode Island, uh, benefits from the Senate bonus just as much as a state that's geographically enormous, like Wyoming, and has a very small population, like Wyoming.
Yeah, Charvi and I were kind of talking about how it's not as much like geographical size as much as the kind of balance between geographical size and population per capita, where Wyoming has like really low population density, but it's really, really big. And so it looks like the land is getting kind of a disproportionately large vote, even if it's representing a very small number of people, like comparatively.
It's an easy misperception to fall into because the maps are striking when you look at them, right? It looks like a sweep.
Yeah, it's like every election season, it's like you're following the map like it's a I
Mhm.
don't know how sports work, but it's like I feel like I was trying to make a sports comparison where like you're watching a game and like pitting the two sides against each other because that's how on
Mhm.
election day I'm watching the maps.
Well, it's like watching a war, right? We call
Yeah,
them battleground states, right? We
true.
literally you have like battlefronts on the map, right? And people are taking key locations and stuff. It looks like that more than a
Yeah.
sport to a lot.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how sports work. Who knows?
I don't know how sports work either. Oh my gosh.
I read a lot of books as a child. I wasn't a sports person. Kind of on the same note of like the way the electoral college is set up, Nebraska and Maine are really unique in that they have like a different system of allocating electors. And Charvi and I talked about that a little bit in our main segment. But I was wondering, like, what your opinion is on whether Maine and Nebraska's solutions are sustainable, like, how that would work if it was all across the country or if that's just completely inviable.
Well, I mean, first, did you guys sort of lay out for your listeners exactly what it is that Maine and
Yeah,
Nebraska do, so I don't do it again?
yeah.
We talked about how they allocate votes per district instead of making it a statewide vote.
Well, and then they remember that still leaves you with 2 votes, right?
Yeah,
That
they
leaves you
give
with
the
the Senate.
Yeah.
senators to the people
Mhm.
who win the statewide.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a system that is actually a throwback. When the Electoral College was first implemented in the early 19th century, right? Once we had fixed all the flaws that came from needing to fix the 12th Amendment, because you had to do that
Mhm.
first. Um, then a lot of states initially created a system whereby they divided the state up into congressional districts, and then those congressional districts also became electoral districts. Some states in the early 19th century even did it where they divided the state up into a set of electoral districts that looked different from their congressional districts, and then they just had 2 additional ones for the Senate. So what Maine and Nebraska are doing is actually what a lot of states did in the early 19th century. It's been around for a while as a way to handle the Electoral College. It has an advantage of being a little more proportionally representative, right? And it's totally legal. Article 2 clearly allows states to structure their Electoral College in that particular way if they want to. Uh, there are 2 very big disadvantages, right? One is a first mover problem in getting other states to reform in that way, right? Why
Right.
doesn't California do that? Well, because California is controlled by the Democratic Party. They have a supermajority in both houses of the legislature and Democratic governor. And if they did that, they would be stabbing their own party in the gut, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
the Democratic candidate would lose like 20 electoral votes out of California because there are some Republicans there, believe it or not, who carry some of the congressional districts.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And I think
That
something we were talking about is like that's kind of one of the issues with the electoral college is the way it's set up. A party will always find a way to manipulate it for their benefits. Like you have gerrymandering, people will redraw districts in a way that will benefit their party. And then you have this where it's just everything is so strategic that I don't feel like there's a really widely accepted good way to make everything fair anymore
Yeah,
under this
and
system.
that's the other big disadvantage of the Maine and Nebraska system is it would allow people to gerrymander the electoral college. Like I don't
Yeah.
know if that's worse or better than the way you lose representation with winner take all system, but it is a problem that comes along with Maine and Nebraska if you adopted it in a state that has a lot of congressional districts and can do a lot of gerrymandering.
Mhm.
Well, you talk about mandatory redistricting. What does that even look like, or what does that mean for someone who doesn't know what that is?
One of the ways that the electoral college might change is if we passed an amendment to the Constitution that requires states to allocate their electors just like Maine and Nebraska do. That would be mandatory
Oh,
district-based elections. And one of the reasons that Hillary Clinton lost the electoral college vote was because in a number of really key states, there were more people who voted for Stein and Johnson than the margin by which Hillary Clinton lost.
Yeah.
And even if you assume that those people wouldn't all convert 100% to Hillary Clinton, right? There are
mhm.
certainly a bunch of libertarians who, if their candidate hadn't been on the ballot, they just wouldn't have voted, or they
Mhm.
would have voted for a Republican instead. But even if you assume those people
Yeah.
wouldn't have converted 100% to Hillary Clinton had their candidate not been on the ballot, um, it still probably would have been enough to win her at least 1 or 2 of the states she lost, and possibly the presidency. Um,
Mhm.
Yeah.
so the electoral college system, as it's currently constituted, eats third parties for lunch. It matters because these are changes that happen at the state level. You actually can sometimes change the way your state government does things. There's a bill coming up in the General Assembly soon, or hopefully there will be a bill coming up in the General Assembly soon to reform the way in which we do our presidential primaries here in Virginia. Because it's
Mhm.
you can't. It's going to be hard to change the way you do the electoral college stuff because there's costs to the political parties.
Hmm.
But aligning the presidential primaries that might be easier.
Mhm. Okay. Kind of going back into our other questions, we talked a tiny bit about the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact in our main segment. Kind of, can you explain kind of what it is, reasons for or against it, and why it might be a good alternative system to the Electoral College or alternative usage of the Electoral College, I guess?
Yeah, so NPVIC plays off of the idea that each state has the authority to determine how to allocate its own electors. to tell its electors what to do and to select its own electors however the heck it wants. And there was actually a really important Supreme Court case about 4 years ago called Chiafalo versus Washington that reaffirmed the degree to which states are pretty free to do what they want with their own electoral college members, right? It reaffirmed that, like, in this case, Washington could fine a member of its electoral college delegation that didn't vote the way they were supposed to, right? A rogue
Mhm.
elector. So NPVIC takes advantage of that because it's a piece of legislation that a state passes that gives a very, very specific and convoluted set of instructions to that state's electors,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what those instructions are is you, as a state, will follow all the electoral college rules that you normally would up until states worth 270 electoral votes have signed on to the NPVIC. At that point, a new set of rules will go into effect for your state. And that set of rules is whichever candidate wins the overall national popular vote, no matter who wins the electoral vote in your state, you will select a slate of electors as the state legislature, um, who will vote for the winner of the national popular vote. So in most states, there are two slates of electors, right? There's the Republican electors and the Democratic electors. And if the Republican candidate wins the popular vote in the state's government goes ahead and sends the Republican slate of electors to cast the state's electoral votes. Democrat, they send the Democratic slate. What the NPVIC says is basically you need to have a third slate of electors. And that slate of electors will vote for whoever wins the national popular vote. And once states worth 270 have signed on, all of them will simultaneously only pick their third slate of electors, the slate that's pledged to vote for whoever won the overall national popular vote.
We're talking about kind of the strategy that goes into the electoral college in states like California, where like you wouldn't want to do certain things at risk of undermining the Democratic majority. How would a really Democratic or really Republican state view the compact? Would it be positive, negative, neutral?
Well, for now, at least for the last few years, the compact has been seen, for better or for worse, as a democratic measure, right? It's
Mhm.
become partisanized. Maybe it shouldn't be. I think you could make an argument that it's just like a good reform.
Mhm.
But for the most part, the states that have passed the NPVIC and put it into place are all states where you have a democratic trifecta, right? Same would be true in Virginia. There's a reason that all the people in Virginia who want to pass the NPVIC are Democratic members of the state legislature, right? So it has been seen as a partisan maneuver, partially because of 2016,
Mhm.
right? 2016
Yeah.
was so memorable for people that the NPVIC was at least partly transformed by it into something that people see as a no more 2016s kind of a measure.
That is actually a question
Oh,
that I have with the Electoral College. There are a lot of layers to prevent any rigging of, the national vote. But if we make it a national popular vote, then I feel like there would be a lot more areas where people can get involved and mess up the system.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. If you have, for example, a national popular vote on November the 4th, and the entire electricity grid in North Dakota goes down,
mm,
right? That's a much bigger problem under a national popular vote system than it is under an electoral college system. It's still a problem in an electoral college system, but a little bit less so,
mhm.
right? Um, I want to, before you wrap completely, I do want to put some audio down so that you can use it to address one of the most common issues. You mentioned at the very beginning, people say, oh, it would be about the big cities, right? Wouldn't they
Mhm.
just dominate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's useful to have some answer to that, which is that, like less than a third of America's population lives in its biggest urban areas. Like even if you add up LA and Seattle and New York and Chicago and maybe Houston, you're still not approaching anywhere near half of the American population.
Mhm.
And those places are politically diverse, right? Like
Hmm.
even in LA, 30% of the voters are Republicans, right? And so the idea that those voters alone could dominate the entire election doesn't take into account how geographically distributed the American population really is, or how politically diverse even those areas are.
Mhm.
At a national popular vote, every person's vote counts equally. So if a candidate really focused on jacking up the turnout in all of America's suburban areas, from Ohio to Spokane, Washington, that's also a way to win. I mean, the Electoral College itself will shape who runs for and who succeeds at being president in 2028, because you often, as a party, are trying to select somebody who you think will appeal to the kind of voters in the swing states.
Mhm.
Right? Where was Joe Biden from?
Where was he from? Am I
Where was he born and where did he grow up?
I actually have zero idea.
I
Central
definitely know,
Pennsylvania.
but again, I'm, like, dead today.
Pennsylvania?
Central Pennsylvania. Yep.
Huh.
Checks out.
That helped him win in 2020.
Interesting.
I'm from Ohio. Maybe I should have been born in a different
I
time.
always forget you're from Ohio.
Thank you to Mr. Yu for that interview. Now, back onto the main segment.
We want to thank our viewers for joining us for that lovely interview with Sam Ulmschneider today. And we hope that that left you with a more holistic view of the issue of the Electoral College. We hope that you guys check out the league's initiatives on the state and national levels regarding the national popular vote, and we hope that you guys will help support the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, which we discussed.
So our community spotlight for this episode is the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, which is an amazing museum in Richmond that hosts a lot of speaker series, events, and also is just a really fun history museum to go to.
We love museums in this duo.
We love museums. But even if you don't live in Richmond, they still have a lot of online programs that you can take part in. So I definitely would recommend checking out their website and seeing how you can get involved and learn from everything they have to offer.
And that wraps up a very complicated episode of DemocraZy. Thank you guys for tuning in for our second episode. And I'm going to wish all the seniors like Emma good luck with actual college applications.
I need it.
She'll be great. You'll all be great. All of you guys will be great. We believe in you. All right. Thank you guys. Bye-bye.
That's DemocraZy signing off.